Hi, Misha here, and you saw the title, so you know we're talking about the Star Trek Starships Shuttle Pack 8 from Eaglemoss. And I've been doing a lot of Eaglemoss videos lately because that's what's been coming in. There haven't been a lot of aircraft models, and frankly, the prices are going up not just on Eaglemoss stuff, but Corgi and Hobby Master too. It's kind of getting to the point where they're not really doing a lot of new aircraft that I don't already have at least an example of. You know what I mean. Anyway, this is what we're doing today. So this is one that was supposed to be out last year, of course, and was delayed. I will say this, the shuttle packs have been pretty consistent in their pricing, which means years ago they seemed pretty expensive. They were roughly $100, sometimes on sale for $75 or $80. They come in this larger, unique box. Whatever way, you know my deal. Trying to let it fall on the models. And inside this larger box, we have 4 smaller packaging boxes that hold 4 shuttle or support craft models. Each has a mini stand and a little orthos. It's kind of holographic see-through thing, and of course a little magazine. Anyway, these seemed kind of expensive for what they were back then, but the shuttle packs have stayed the same price, $80 to $100. Meanwhile, all the other editions have gone up, first from $19.95 to $22.95, then $24.95, and in some instances the smaller editions are even $29.95. So with that, this doesn't seem so out of line anymore. And Pack 8 is different. 1 through 7 were all, if not strictly speaking, Starfleet ships, Federation human ships, or support craft. Plus we had one from the Kelvin verse, but it was still human ships. This is the first one with alien craft in it. And we've got a pretty neat little selection. We've got the de facto Ferengi shuttle pod, or just shuttlecraft. We've got the Toron Klingon shuttle. And then we have a Vulcan shuttle. And then finally, a Xindi Insectoid assault shuttle. All I'm going to say is Pack 9 better have some Romulan stuff. But since we did get so many Romulan ships from the Universe Collection recently, I guess I'll let it slide. Let's, get a little closer up with these. I'm not going to bother with the spinny thingy this time. And I'm going to do these kind of in the order I felt like, kind of in the order they appear in the show. They all 4 ship together, but technically they are issues 29 and 30, 31, 32 in the series. Let's do the Ferengi shuttle pod or shuttlecraft, because there are basically 2 sizes represented by the same studio model. It has the standard kind of miniature stand here with the tray on top that the previous shuttles have all had. It's not great, but I actually just don't even display mine on these. Typically I have them in kind of a little arts case. Anyway, this is about 3 inches long, 2.5 to 3 inches. Pretty good size with the warp prongs. Kind of reminds me of a Viking helmet. What do you think? But it is unmistakably Ferengi. We first see one of these in Season 3 of The Next Generation, the whole Barzan wormhole thing. That ship with 2 crew aboard gets trapped in the Delta Quadrant and actually appears again in Voyager years later. Supposedly with the same ship, although that does kind of get us to the size. Originally, this seemed to be about a 6 or 7 meter pod, but later appearances from the Voyager episode, as well as Little Green Men with Quark's treasure using the same model, seem to mean it's a little smaller than a runabout, say 16 to 18 meters. so there's some discrepancy there, but it's all fiction. It's all good. It's all Ferengi. And it seems like it either operates from, say, a Decora's-class Marauder, or is independently, privately operated, like in the example of the Grand Nagus or Quark. It's known as the Nafar or Nafar class. It does have phasers and shielding, but what it's really known for is it's a fast ship, especially in a straight line. Actually a little faster than a Federation runabout. But it's not a combat ship. It's not designed for maneuverability. It is designed for dependability, being rugged, because, well, Ferengi don't want to pay for repairs on the regular, right? And it has 3 basic sections, at least the large version. We have a cockpit up front with control globes, and then we have a central section that's a living quarters. It has bunks, a replicator, and most importantly, a toilet, a refresher, if you will. So this is intended for relatively long-range operations. And in the rear, we have a cargo hold, because Ferengi, and it's referenced in the Little Green Men episode. There's a few variations over time with different engine colors. Also, it's not perfectly symmetrical. There's dots on this side of the rear of the hull, and they're not on this one. Again, this started off as a practical, real model from the Next Generation, and then it just carried over for Deep Space Nine and Voyager. Yeah, it's the Ferengi ship. I know years ago people wanted to see Quark's ship, so here we go. And it's actually a pretty good size. If it were just a little bit bigger, it would probably pass for a regular edition, frankly. It's, like I said, about 3-ish inches long, but it's also a couple inches wide. The center part's all metal. And then I think of them as to do with the warp engines. I just support. They're plastic. And the bottom is a mix of metal and plastic, just depending on where the seam is. And I think this back is metal too. At least partially. It's got some decent weight to it. Unfortunately, the little tray stand is adequate on a shelf. But any knocking is going to slide it and do that. Honestly, if it was a little bit textured or rubberized where it had some grip to it or something, it would be better. But this is something they've always done with the Shuttle Packs. Because these are, they call them shop exclusives, limited editions. So I guess, costs go up for special things. With that, let's move on to our next generation ship. The Klingon Toron shuttle. Although we could just call this generic Alien Shuttle 2. By the way, the Ferengi ship over there had a standard crew of 2 to 3 and could hold up to half a dozen passengers. Anyway, this is a single-seater for a Klingon. And while we see this in Season 7 of The Next Generation, at least in its Klingon version here, we see this throughout Seasons 2, 3, or at least 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, as various alien ships. Probably most famously, it was once the Nienbeck from the episode where we get rid of Wesley Crusher. But it's been modified, and there was a rear section added. This was even once a time pod and other things. Yeah, generic alien ship, basically. And there was an actual miniature scale model for the actors to interact with, and then there was a on-screen in space version as well, and several pictures and paintings were used. It was just to make sure people realized it wasn't a Federation. Not a whole lot to be said about it. It's piloted by one. You see, it kind of has this unique split front screen. It has kind of a brownish coloring with Klingon styling and markings on it. It's about 5 meters. Pretty thick in the back. In the episode, we see it in the hands of the Klingon Coral, who's a merchant courier, black marketeer. It does seem warp capable. I'm sure it's Klingon. It's going to have some kind of disruptors. It's a background ship, and it's a background ship created before the time of CGI and all that. So it does remind me kind of a little bit of some of the Federation shuttle pods. But the model itself is just there, but it is really nice to have a Klingon shuttle. Also, the back door is kind of interesting. It too comes with the tray style stand, and much like Federation ships, it just sits on there, and again, can be knocked off. I will say it's a little shorter than our Ferengi ship, maybe 2.5 inches, but over an inch wide, and it's actually very heavy, heavier than some standard edition. This is pretty much all metal. So one benefit of this being a pretty basic model means they were able to cast it in pretty much all die-cast metal. I think this middle part of the bottom is plastic, but then even here is metal. So yeah, this little square on the bottoms are only plastic part. So it does have some chunk to it. So it doesn't feel cheesy. And it's actually, considering how small of a ship it is, a good size. It'll look quite nice next to some of our other Klingon merchant type ships we've had, mostly from Enterprise. But yeah, the Toron-class Klingon shuttle. I don't think it ever appeared in Deep Space Nine. I think it was just in that Next Generation episode. But with that, let's go back in time. The Vulcan shuttle, as seen in Enterprise Season 1 and in Season 4. We also see this design used in the Kelvin universe by a few Vulcans at that time as well. And this one's a first for one of the shuttles, in that it doesn't have the generic stand. It actually has a slight modification of the tray where it's curled up and rounded, because this probably would not sit on a flat surface all that well, like most Vulcan ships. It has a long cylindrical main hull with a warp ring. It's a half ring, or actually a little bit less than half technically. But for a ship, this is considered a scout ship or long-range shuttle. It's actually quite long, about 35 meters, quite thin, but yeah, it's a little bigger than a runabout and will be pretty capable. It's said to be 2 decks, at least in areas, so it's a pretty good size shuttle. But we really don't know much more about it. Obviously, it's warp capable because of the ring. And these are carried aboard Vulcan cruisers and the 2150s. And we see, just being used as a conveyance, which is good. And it fits in well with the Vulcan fleet we've already got. It's probably our longest one, a little over 3 inches, I would say, but it's actually quite light because it's so narrow. The ring is plastic. The main body is metal, including the tip, but since it's so thin, there's not a ton of weight here to it. Nevertheless, it seems nice to have a Vulcan ship, even if I don't have a whole lot to say about it. And for our 4th and final shuttle today, and we end with the Xindi Insectoid, as Reed calls it, assault shuttle. Think of it as a fighter. This one and the Ferengi ship we probably know the most about. The Klingon and the Vulcan are just background ships to get people from point A to point B. This one too has its own custom stand, and it's actually the best stand. Otherwise, still very much the same. And we're actually getting quite a nice Xindi fleet. We've got at least one ship of each of the races. And we have, this is now our third Insectoid ship. I'd like to see maybe Degra's ship or the cargo freighter in the next shuttle pack. Or maybe the Aquatics shuttle. But this one's a neat start. This is also relatively long, maybe slightly shorter than the Vulcan, but we also are taller. And it's relatively light. I think that's metal, I believe. And the top is, the bottom is plastic. So the top bit with the spike is metal, and then we transition to plastic on the bottom. And it's, interesting critter. This is not big, about 7 meters, but it's for the insectoids, which are relatively small creatures, and it only holds 2 at that. Humans can squeeze in, but it's very cramped, and humans can pilot it, but it's very difficult, even according to Mayweather. Although we do see Archer attempting to fly it by himself. This spiky thing, which is somehow part of the propulsion or vortex system, actually folds. There's a slot under it, so when it's inactive landed or in other environments, it can fold in and down. We know that this devotes quite a bit of its power generation to the structural integrity field, and that allows it to go into high, heavy atmospheres like a gas giant, or perhaps even something like Venus. It also operates as a submarine. We actually see that in the show where it's going underwater. So its streamlined shape makes a lot of sense. We also know it's quite well armed with about 6 particle cannons or particle beam emitters and at least 1 torpedo or warhead launcher. But it's not a traditional shuttle in the sense that it seems to carry a lot. It does seem to be a patrol ship, an assault craft, what have you. There's also this kind of part of the spike here. I wonder if this is part of the torpedo launcher. I don't know. And this really shows them getting confident with CGI. They still needed something that maybe they could display with the actors working around it, but by this point in space and whatnot, they were using totally CGI, which let them get a little more adventurous and wild. This is the most interesting and kind of maybe fully realized ship. And I do like that it has its own special stand. Not 100% sure. One end is bigger than the other. So I'm not completely sure. I think it goes this way. It seems better. Yeah, I think that clips in there. You can actually kind of wedge it in pretty tight, but once you get it in, whichever way seems to fit best, there like that. Either way, it will fit its stand and display quite nicely. So I think they started to learn their lesson once they got to these more rounded ships. But yeah, we see this at the beginning of 2054 during the Xindi War, and it did play quite a prominent part, all things considered. A lot of the Xindi ships did. So yeah, that's an overview of Shuttle Pack 8. All 4 pieces have something to kind of recommend them, but of course they are background secondary ships, so don't expect anything too ornate or flashy. I think my favorite is the Ferengi shuttle, but that's just because it's been in so many episodes and was kind of a primary plot point in the Quark episode, Little Green Men. The design's interesting enough. Pretty basic, but unmistakably Ferengi. The Vulcan shuttle is nice, but we have quite a few similar Vulcan ships. We just don't know much about it. I do think the Xindi is a really nicely realized model, and I like that it has its stand. Certainly the Klingon ship is the most boring. It's, again, generic alien ship number 3. But if we're going to start doing alien ships, we've got to give the Klingons something. It just makes sense. And it is the heaviest. It's the most die-cast of them all. So there's something to be said for that. But, yeah, what do you think? Different, unique. I don't think many other companies will ever do these ships in die-cast. Maybe the Ferengi, but the other 3, extremely doubtful. Hell, it's hard enough just to find computer models of these. So, Pack 8 seems fine. I'm glad they're getting away from the Federation because they pretty much mine dry. But there are plenty of alien secondary ships if they want to continue. But I do hope they don't raise the price. It was high. Now it seems okay, considering everything else has gone up. But if they bump it up to 119... Anyway, it is what it is. Just wanted to share it with you today. As always, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.